Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start, as I mentioned, and um, so while I was preparing this and looking at it, I decided to, of course, look at two or three different authors and their particular techniques for figuring out how to find professions. So I thought we would split this into two halves, or we would go back and forth. We would look at this as, okay, how do you find profession? And how do you, because we're looking for profession, a medical profession. So we're looking at how do you find a medical profession in the chart, right? So that is, so I thought, okay, well, let's go back and look at profession. And then when I was looking at two or three different techniques, I saw one or two things that I didn't kind of pick up on fully when we were originally looking at it. We originally were looking at this particular technique, which is Guido Bonatti. And if you remember, that's where we saw we originally discovered the value of Leontine Price's chart, because she had an exact thing that the Bonatti was saying, which was when a planet was coming out from under the rays 20 degrees, no more than 20 degrees, and was being aspected by the moon, that planet would usually represent the profession, and that planet was Venus in Leontine Price's, and it was in the second house, and it was exalted in the second house with the ruler of the second, and with Mercury, who rules the voice, if we remember from our talks about Mercury. So so that was a really interesting chart for that. But first, I want to kind of switch over. I started here with this one, but I want to switch over to two different astrologers that we haven't really looked at very much. This is a guy named Abu Ali al-Khayyat, and he is definitely quoted by Guido Bonatti, but not that often. And I just want to bring you to this second or this third line. The significator of a profession is that planet which is in the ascendant or the midheaven, oriental from the sun, so that means they're going to rise before the sun and set before the sun, and occidental from the moon. Okay, so that part we've maybe kind of seen before, but this is the part which I realized that I hadn't looked at closely enough. Also in diurnal nativities, the one to which the moon first applies after the new moon or full moon preceding the nativity, and the part of fortune in nocturnal nativity. So either what the new moon, either in a diurnal chart, the planet to whom the moon would be applying to after the degree of the new moon or full moon, right? And we're going to look at that. Actually, let's look at that right now.
If the new moon would happen, sorry, just a question. If the new moon would happen before birth, do you take that one? Do you count from there?
So we always count from the previous. So basically, the first thing we do is we figure out the relationship between the sun and the moon, right? So I'm going to answer your question the long way. So in this particular chart, this is the chart of Alois Alzheimer, and he discovered senility. He discovered like the condition that we understand as senility, and then Alzheimer's, and that's where the name comes from. But in this particular chart, we can see that the moon is in a sign that but follows the sign that the sun is in, and it is almost 120 degrees away from the sun. That means if it's in a sign that follows the sun, right? The sun is in Gemini, Libra follows Gemini, then that means that the moon is waxing, right? So we're coming from a new moon in this chart. If we were to see that the moon were in a sign preceding the sign, then we would see that the moon was in a wax. So hey, oh hello. So basically, I'm trying to say, in order to see the waxing sign, the new moon is where the moon and the sun are conjunct. As a result, it's going to go through the order of the signs to the sign where it is opposing the sun, which marks the opposition or full moon, right? So the conjunction is the new moon. The moon then walks or strides towards through the order of the signs to the sign that directly opposes the sun, the sign that the sun is in. That shows that the moon is then full. Any sign that the moon is in after the opposition to the sun shows the waning, and she's going back to dark. So once again, new moon is the conjunction, full moon is the opposition. We know from the Bonatti things that we had seen that neither of that in this particular case, neither of those conditions are particularly good for the moon. Now, to answer your question specifically, which was, well, wait, how do we figure that out? So what we know as a result of what I just said is that this chart is a previous new moon chart, because this moon has not reached the opposition to the sun yet. So giving 2 days or 2 degrees to each sign, we would go back, or in this case, I'm going to give 1 day, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 9 days. So 9 days, going back 9 days and subtracting, or 9 degrees and subtracting 9 degrees, because remember, the sun travels at 58 minutes every day, right? He basically travels at practically 1 degree every day. So going back 9 degrees brings us from the 24th degree to the 15th degree of Gemini. That is the degree of the previous new moon in this chart. I'm going to do it again. So remember that the new moon always is initiated by a conjunction. The full moon is always initiated by an opposition of the sun to the moon. That's when she's in full opposition and can fully reflect his light back to him. So once the conjunction or new moon is finished, then the moon continues to move through the signs as per the order of the signs until she gets to the opposition sign. And once she is in the sign opposing the sun, she is then full. And then as she continues, she is in what is called the waning half, and she is moving towards darkness. Okay, so that's how we, in a chart, decide what's happening prior. Is it a new moon happening prior? Is it a full moon happening prior? In this chart, the moon is in Libra, the sun is in Gemini. The moon has not reached the opposition, which would be Sagittarius, but the moon is moving in the order of the signs. Thus, this is a previous new moon chart. And so using 2 degrees for each day, 2 degrees or 2 days for each sign, except in this particular case, I'm only going to use 1. Okay, so so here's 1 degree using Libra. This is 3, this is 5, this is 7, this is 9. This brings us back 9 days or 9 degrees, and we subtract 9 from the degree that the sun has traveled, right? Because we're going back 9 days. And 9 days ago, the sun was at 15. 15 degrees of Gemini. So the previous new moon is Gemini. So now why are we wasting all this time doing this, or why are we spending all this time on this? Because the rule is in a day chart. Oh, sorry, thank you. In a day chart, we're looking at what would the moon's first application be after leaving the Mercury. After leaving the sun, after leaving the conjunction of the sun. The conjunction or the opposition of the sun. Now, this one isn't really a very good, we don't really need to do it in this chart because look, the moon's next conjoining, or her next application, is to Mars himself. And if you remember, Mars from last week, Mars represents the surgeon. And let me just go here for just 1 second. Like I said, this isn't going to be the most organized. Which, if Mars were to aspect the significator of our work or of our profession, the above mentioned aspects or places, or he himself were the significator of the native's work, it will signify the native is going to be proven in medicine and likewise in theology or surgery, and especially in surgery, because he's cutting. And likewise in theology, I find that interesting. Maybe that's because of the debate. And exactly, so that's my point about what we're going to see in these charts, is we're going to be looking for what creates a Mars, or what creates a surgeon, what finds profession. And so I've just got a little bit ahead of myself, it looks like, but as you can see, we're going to find that Mars, and I've got quite a few charts of different surgeons, especially, we're going to see that Mars figures somehow. There's always something where Mars is kind of either he's activated by this particular rule that we just saw, or he's activated by what we're seeing right now, where it's the next application, or he's activated, often there's a connection between Mars and the 6th house. So we're going to see all of this stuff in a second, but let me go back then to here. So what Bonatti said originally was, don't look at the 10th house ruler. Well, you should be looking at, right? Remember, one of the things we learned when we were doing the class on traditional astrology was that even though we're talking about a house, we might not look primarily to that house for the answer. We might not look primarily to that house to figure out the significations of that house. So, for instance, in looking at the 10th house in profession, he doesn't say, look to the sign on the 10th house, look to the ruler of the 10th. He doesn't do that. The first thing he says is look at the ascendant of the nativity and see if one of the planets is found in it. Then he says, if there's no planet in the ascendant, look at the 10th. Look at the planet in the 10th. He doesn't say look at the sign on the cusp. He doesn't say, look at the planet who rules the 10th. He says, first things first, look to see if there are any planets in the angles. The ascendant, if there isn't a planet there, look at the 10th. Is there not a planet there? Look at the 7th. Notice that the minute we leave the 1st and the 10th, the motivation of the person lowers. However, the 7th will signify the laziness of the native. So if you don't see anything in the 10th, look at the 7th. However, the 7th means that the person isn't as motivated to work. And then
Antoine,
if there's yeah.
Sorry, when you say look at the 1st and the 10th, we're talking same sign and conjunction with maybe within like 10 degrees of either the ascendant or midheaven.
Yeah, I would say so. Now we have a few charts here where where the midheaven is the 9th house. And where I turned
Right, so
So I turned it to a whole sign house. So we're going to be open to all the ambiguities. But I would say yes. I would prefer within 8 degrees of the midheaven itself, and the sign of the midheaven, or in the 10th if it's not in the sign of the midheaven. And like I said, I've got some for whom we've got those high, very far northern charts where I've switched them to whole sign anyway. So we'll be looking at both ways. Thank you. Fantastic question. Yeah, fantastic question. Same thing with some of these charts. We've got planets that are in the same sign as the ascendant, but in the 12th house part, right? So which would be whole sign 1st house, but with a quadrant house is in the 12th. So same kind of thing we'll be looking at. All right, so If it's not in the ascendant, is it in the 10th? Is it not? If it's not in the ascendant, if there isn't a planet in the ascendant, now why? So Lalo, so why? Why do you think that they would be saying this instead, or anybody? Instead
It
of
has to
looking,
do with angularity. It has to do with the strength, I think, to act and its particularity to you. I think the ascendant is the most personal point on the chart.
and the most visible.
Totally.
Right. And the most visible, right? So the ascendant is about visibility, right? It's our body, it's our actual physical body, it's our looks, right? And so, and then the 10th is our public reputation. It's the works by which we are known, right? So we were talking a little bit about this last week about if you might be a really, okay. So I was in the closet for a really short time while I was in high school, but then I got outed. And so for my entire 4 years in high school, I was the school fag. That was my reputation, right? So now I could have had that reputation and been straight. And so that's the difference between the first house and the 10th house. If I had had that reputation and, you know, as being the fag, but I was really straight, then we would see the difference between the first and the 10th. But in this particular case, you know, the rumor was true. But that's kind of my point, or that's the way that we can see the 10th house. Or think of Lindsay Lohan, right? You know, think of Lindsay Lohan or Charlie Sheen or Andy Dick. These are all people who, aside from their profession, have reputations, right? Have other types of reputations. That's the 10th house at work. Of course, it's fed by the first house, right, and the moon and the, you know, Mercury and all that stuff. But that's the difference. So fantastic answer, and it goes back to this concept of advancement, right? So anything in an angle is advancing, is going to be seen, is going to be more publicly known, and more pushed forward towards. So if it's not in the 7th, then look to the 4th. If it's not in the 4th, okay, so if there's no planets in the 10th, 4th, or 7th, or 1st, then you would look, the next thing you would do is to look to see the rulers of those planets. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for who is the actual, who's in the angles. Nobody in angles? Then the next thing we do is we look to who's the ruler of the angles. And this is where we come back to to what we were just talking about. Then look even at the planet to which the moon is first joined after her corporal separation from the sun. That's where we just were. Or the planet which were first joined with the part of fortune, if it's nocturnal. So this is a section that in our class, we didn't really look at. We looked at number 7, right? That was when we saw the Leontine price chart. You would even look to see whether one of the planets is newly appearing from under the rays of the sun, removed from him by not more than 20 degrees, and see if that planet or he or is with the 1st, 10th, 4th, or 7th, it is all with the moon, right? And so, and also in this particular chart, the Leontine price chart, it was Venus. Venus was ruler of the 4th. She was just 20 degrees away from the sun, coming out from under the rays, and the moon was applying to her. So, but what we're looking at then is these first 3 segments, and you'll notice what they say after this is, if, however, you define one of the planets to which 2 of the aforesaid accidents pertained, you will consider him only. So in other words, if it's a planet who is in an angle, if there are no planets in an angle, the rulers of the angle, if there or a planet that the moon would have aspected first from the degree of the previous new moon or full moon by day, or that the part of fortune would reach first by night. So if it's a nocturnal chart. So this is that section I'm talking about. This number 6 here. This is the thing that we didn't do anything with. And it introduces us to a completely new thing, which is how to finding the previous new moon or previous full moon in our chart or in a chart, and understanding the importance of it. And so this is so, and notice that it's not just Bonatti that says it, right? Of course, Bonatti is a compendium. He's a compendium of the Arabics, right? But Abu Ali Khayyat says it. So looking to which the moon applies after the new moon or full moon preceding the nativity, and the part of fortune in the nocturnal nativity. Schörner in the 15th to 16th century. Now he does it a little bit differently. So he says, look first at a planet that's come from under the rays, and it possesses the midheaven, and it's being applied to by the moon by aspect. Okay, so he says a little bit different. So we're looking for a planet that's come out from under the rays, it's in the midheaven, and it's being applied to by the moon, right? So if these two conditions which have been described should come together in one star, that's what you would look at for Magistery. So do we see it's getting super specific? And then I think he does go back to, if however a planet doesn't appear in the morning or another located, right, that's ascendant or in the morning, right? Or in the midheaven aspecting the moon, but both must be chosen. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I went too far. But if one of the aforesaid happens such that none of the planets appears in the morning before the disk of the sun, that's in the ascendant, but instead of this, some planet resides in the midheaven, having an aspect to the moon, choose that planet as the governor of employment. Okay.
Could the governor be the moon itself?
No, no, because it says choose that planet as the governor. Right? So the planet has to have an aspect to the moon. Why would we not use the moon as the governor? And why would we want the planet that the moon is aspecting? Any idea?
Horary says that the moon shows like what's going to happen, like the status of the event. So if you read it like horary, like it has to do with, actually, I don't know.
Well, no, you're close.
What was
You're
the
really.
question?
The question is, okay, so her question was, hey, isn't it saying, would it be saying that the moon is the governor? And
No, I wasn't asking. Yeah, I was asking if it could be, because I have the moon conjuncting my midheaven.
Oh, got it. So could the moon be governor? Okay, okay, right, thank you. So could the moon be governor? And in this particular point, I say, it looks no, the moon cannot be governor, or rather that the moon, or it depends on the situation. Like, is the moon the ruler of the ascendant? Maybe she can be governor in that particular case. Do you see what I mean? I'm not saying no, but what this is actually saying is that it's some other planet. And if you remember from when we started, here, look at the second paragraph. Mars, Venus, and Mercury are kind of traditional planets that represent employment and magistery.
Okay, that makes sense.
And wanting the moon to be connected, it's because why? The moon transmits the influence, right? Remember, the thing about Mercury and the moon is they become who they're in connection to. They take on the signification of who they're in connection to. So in this case, the moon as ruler of women could possibly govern the situation. You see what I'm saying? So yes, maybe she can. Yes, maybe she can. What this is, however, intimating is that what we're looking for is who the moon is contacting for it.
Got it. Yeah.
So obviously be involved because she's contacting. And we're going to see that here with these surgeon charts. And so, okay, so his is different. He says first, look and see if there's any planet in the ascendant, or there's a planet in the midheaven, and a moon is, and he's just making it easy. Is there a planet in the ascendant and a planet in the midheaven? Is the moon applying to it? Then look at that, right? Oh, as a matter of fact, he says, I see what he actually means. Is there a star in the ascendant who owns the midheaven, who the moon is applying to? So is the ruler of the 10th in the first house coming out from under the rays and the moon is applying, use that planet. However, if that's not happening, it's not in the ascendant and it's not ruling the 10th, then you would observe only that planet in the magistery of the native. But if one of the four set happens, such as none of the planets appears in the morning before the disk of the sun, but instead of this, some planet resides in the midheaven. So now we're going from, okay, it's not in the first house, maybe it's now in the 10th, then choose that planet. If, however, a planet does not appear in the morning and another is located in the midheaven aspecting the moon, both must be chosen. Now that's interesting. A planet does not appear in the morning and another is located in the midheaven aspecting to the moon, both must be chosen. I don't know what he means by both, because he just kind of said the same thing. However, prefer that planet which surpasses, testimonies, obviously. Oh shit, wait, no, it's not the same. Prefer that planet which surpasses the other according to the multitude of testimonies in the place of the sun, in the midheaven or in the ascendant, and by both of those you will determine the employment. So it's not simple. So it hasn't. So he isn't doing things simply either. He's got his own little complicated way of doing it. But it looks like the continuity between maybe say 9th century Abu al-Khayyat and Bonatti in the 10th and the 12th, 13th century is what we will look at. So before we do that, what I wanted to kind of show is once you find this planet, then he had all of these particular things to look at if that planet was connected to another planet. So I thought so you could do it, of course, if the planet itself, right? So let's say we're looking at your chart and the chart that's in the midheaven and moon is applying to is Mars, or it's moon, connected to the midheaven, or it's Mars, or it's Venus rather. Right, so then we would be saying, okay, it looks like Venusian type things would, maybe you make jewelry, or maybe into clothing and fashion, or maybe into beauty and whatever. But if Venus is with Saturn, notice how it changes it. If it's with Saturn, it will signify the native's fortune will prevail in the cultivation of lands and trees and the planting. If Jupiter, honest and wise, likewise a writer distinguished above others. Mars makes them proven in medicine, especially surgery. The Sun, high profession, loftiness, and a writer for kings, so working with exalted people. With Venus, so I mean, obviously it is Venus, but once again, kings and nobles will often have power among them and profit from them. So remember, Venus represents courtiers and those that dealt with the latest fashions, like a high court. Mercury, good with numbers, knowledge of writing. The moon, okay, look, if the moon were with it, native and complete fortune in those things which are ended quickly. So a quickness or changeability would have something to do with the moon as governor. And look, also it says if the moon were to aspect him, it signifies the native's knowledge and complete fortune in those things which are ended quickly, whipped and put in chains from thence, or he will be beaten or convicted. I wonder what that's about. Okay, so let's look at a chart here and there and just kind of start looking from that perspective. So we were just looking at Alois Alzheimer. And in this particular chart, we don't really need to. Yeah, you want to go through the processes again? As a matter of fact, we'll do it with the chart. So the first process we're going to do is we're going to look to see if there's any planet in the ascendant. If there's no planet in the ascendant, then we look to see if there's a planet in the midheaven. If there's no planet in the midheaven, we look to see if there's a planet in the 7th. If there's no planet in the 7th, we look to see if there's a planet in the 4th. So that's the first.
Antoine, here we're not counting Uranus as a planet, correct?
No. Yes, that's
Coolio.
absolutely right. That's right. Although, since this person found a new way, he discovered something new, we can certainly see its function, that it's there, that it's happening.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know if it was you who said this, but someone was like, you should just treat it like a fixed star. And that made so much sense to me.
It's me. It was me. It was I who said it. Yeah.
That was a good one.
Thank you. In this particular case, we've got a planet that fits the bill really well, the sun. Right? The planet that fits it the best is really the sun on some level, right? Because the sun's right on the cusp of the ascendant. And one of the things I'm noticing is that the sun tends to kind of figure greatly in almost all of these charts, because these are all charts of people healing the public, right? And the sun is the healer. So you're going to find that the sun's involved. But what I find really interesting is look at how the moon's next application is to the Mars. In this particular case, remembering that the very first thing that we did, the cutting healer, indeed. The very first thing that I also said was go back to the degree of the previous new moon or full moon. We discovered that that was 15 degrees of Gemini, and then look to see what would be the first thing that the moon would apply to from there. Now, one of the interesting things about it is 15 degrees of Gemini means that she's already finished everything. So she would actually have to go into Cancer to then start applying to things. And the first thing that she would do, and it's quite a while, but the first thing she would do is square Mars. Now, we don't have to do it, or she'd square the Saturn, right? She'd square the Saturn, but she'd square the Saturn-Mars opposition, right? So she would basically square the Saturn-Mars opposition. But
I'm sorry for this really dumb question. Is this a day chart or a night chart?
Yeah, this is a day chart. Definitely.
Okay.
Day chart.
So moon as opposed to part of fortune.
Absolutely.
Aspect.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
If we were doing part of fortune, it would be the Mercury, right? Because it'd be what the first planet that the part of fortune at the beginning of Libra would aspect would be Mercury. So that doesn't really connect us at all to Mars. But remember, it's Mars who's the surgeon in traditional astrology. And notice this here, this sixth house with Jupiter here. Mars is the ruler of the sixth. The moon's applying to the Mars. Also, he discovered a problem with memory and the head, right? So notice Mercury is the ruler of the ascendant. Oh, so if this were a night chart, it would work with the Mercury. Mercury is the ruler of the ascendant. Mercury rules memory. And so the first house is the head. The sun is here on the head as well. We have the Mars exactly opposing the part of fortune. And we've got the ruler of the part of fortune just leaving the sextile of the Mars. So I'm adding that as well, the ruler of the part of fortune. And I think he even does mention it later on in his segments. But in this particular chart, we would look primarily, it looks to the sun necessarily in this, but the sun doesn't really point to it as well. It looks like it's the Venus and the moon that point to it the best. What might be working for this, not necessarily. And who rules the 10th? Look at how the Mars rules the natural 10th. The Saturn actually rules the midheaven. The sun rules the fourth. The sun is ruler of the fourth, but the moon is applying to the Mars, right? So the moon's applying to the Mars, and the Jupiter rules the seventh, right? But the moon's applying to the Mars as the ruler of the natural 10th. So I think that fits quite well.
You mentioned Jupiter in the sixth because he's a doctor, so he like treats illnesses.
I'm thinking, well, I just said see the Jupiter in the sixth, but notice that the sixth is ruled by Mars.
Got it. Thank you.
We're gonna see this. We're gonna see connections with the sixth house, because who's the ruler of the first? The ruler of the first is Mercury, who's in Gemini. The moon is in Libra. Venus is sextile the Mars. The moon is opposing Mars. Mars is the ruler of the sixth house. And the sixth house would be ailments to the head in this particular case, right? Because Mars is in Aries, which is ailments to the head. Aries is the head. So that's where I was going with that. This is the chart. This is an infamous chart. Joseph Mengele, who was the famous Nazi surgeon who did all those horrible things. He did all these horrible experiments with twins and trying to change eye color and dismemberments. I mean, just a completely amoral person. And we can see that the amorality of this person here with the Jupiter in Scorpio. Remember, Mars and Jupiter are enemies. So Jupiter's in an enemy sign. Jupiter is retrograde. And we talk about the waywardness of the retrograde, the returning to an evil. And we've got it with K2 here. So there's a headlessness around it. There's a Thomas. So there's like a morbid, which could be kind of a morbid curiosity. Notice even though it's kind of far, the Jupiter is applying to the opposition of the Saturn. The Jupiter is applying to the opposition to the K2, but the Saturn is also there. But so if we're looking for using our process, and note that the Jupiter rules the Mercury. I just wanted to point that out too. Okay, so Neptune we wouldn't use. Uranus we wouldn't use. Now Venus is in the natural 10th. Mercury, but this Mercury Sun is in the midheaven here. And then the natural fourth would be the moon, right? And now we have Mercury ruling the fourth in the 10th. So is there any aspect between Mercury and the moon? Not really. Is there any aspect? Now the moon is applying to Venus. So that does make sense. Note also that this, once again, we've got this Jupiter in Scorpio. Now Jupiter is ruling the 6th. So what I'm looking at then is, what would we think? Would it be maybe this Venus is the ruler representing it? Or would we try to find now the previous full or new moon? So remember we were saying that the new moon always starts with a conjunction to the sun, then it moves to the opposition. Once it's at the opposition, that's full. So this moon is past the opposition in Libra. So that means that we could probably go one day back, one to maybe 3 days back. This is 1 day, 3 days. Now I usually do this because she's not quite at 15 degrees. She's not quite at the middle of her course. So I would take it back just 1 day. So 1 day, and then back here is another 3 days. And so that would take us to about 21 degrees of Pisces. Now, 21 degrees of Pisces is where the Mercury is, right? But what would be the next thing she would do after that? Nothing. The next thing she would do after 21 degrees of Pisces is she would sextile the Mars. Right, so we just kept moving her, right? So let's say it's at 21 degrees. It could be that it's the Mercury, right? It could be that it's the actual Mercury. But if the moon is a little bit further along than the Mercury, then the very next aspect that the moon would make, if we just kind of rolled her forward, would be this aspect to Mars. So, and actually, if we look at what is the last application, the moon's last application in this chart is to Mars. The moon just separated from Mars, and she's applying to Venus. So once again, we have this connection between Mars and the moon. But also what we have is this connection between Mars and the ruler of the part of fortune. Part of fortune is 29, is in the 30th degree of Capricorn. Saturn is at 4 degrees of Taurus. Mars is at 1 degree. So Mars is applying to Saturn. So this is the second chart we've seen where Mars is applying, or in some kind of aspect, to the ruler of the part of fortune. In the Alois Alzheimer chart, the ruler of the part of fortune is just separating. Now in this Mengele chart, the ruler of the part of fortune is applying to the square. So maybe that's something we need to be looking at. Maybe we need to check, even though that's not even though that's not high on the list, let's actually go to his list, because I'm pretty sure it's on there. It's just not where. No, I guess
Hey,
it's not.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we look at where the previous moon or the, previous full moon or the previous new moon was, and if we notice that it's less, that the moon is void of course, like we see that, for example, if it was a previous new moon and we witness an opposition, but the moon does not aspect any sign until it's in that sign. So are we going to take that into consideration, or are we just going to see where it's aspecting next?
Yes, because it's like you're rolling a Rolodex.
Uh-huh.
It's like you're rolling a Rolodex forward. It's not, we're not looking for, we're not looking for real aspects. We're
Right.
looking, right, we're taking it from a specific place. The importance of the full moon and new moon was that it was considered to represent everything. It was
Right.
considered to represent wholes, the WHOLES.
Right.
So the entire thing.
So we're just gonna see what it aspects, regardless of whether it does in the same sign or if it has to go into the next sign to do that.
That's right, because as far as this chart is
Alright.
concerned, that might be the case, right? So if this is all happening at 20 in the 21st degree, let's say this is happening at 21 degrees and with the sun,
Right.
then
Right.
there's nothing else she's going to touch. She's void of
Until
course
she's a Libra.
until she leaves
Yeah.
Pisces and goes into Aries and sextiles Mars. That's basically what
Yeah.
I just. Yeah. So in this particular
Yeah,
case,
exactly.
it doesn't matter. We're just looking at what's the first thing she's going to do once let's
Once
project
she's
the
done that,
point,
yeah.
and who's the first person she comes into contact with after
Right.
that.
Right. Right. Thanks.
Yeah. Good question. This is okay, Louis. Now, who is? I've got these. Okay, so Louis Ozu obtained a medical degree in 1818. He was an anatomist and naturalist. And he created, that's right, he visited the paper mache workshop of Francois Ameline and later set up a workshop making very accurate human and veterinary anatomical models in his Normandy birthplace. Okay, so basically he was an anatomist, which meant that he would have to open, he would have to open up cadavers in order to see them. So that's the surgery part. So, but basically he was involved in what? He was involved in the creation of art. So what I see is interesting is note that Mercury and Venus and Jupiter, Mercury and Venus and the sun are all in Aries. And note also that the ruler of the sixth is on the part of fortune. That's the moon. So let's see what's going on here. First, is there anything in the 1, 4, 7, 10? Look, we've got Mars in 1, 4, 7, 10, right? If we look from a quadrant, we've got Mars in the fourth house. If we look from a non-quadrant standpoint, then we've got all of this. If we look from a whole sign standpoint, then we've got this assembly in Aries, which is ruled by Mars. Now, Mars is the ruler of the fourth. And all of that stuff is there. Now, the moon is not applying to him. What is the moon applying to? The moon's really not applying to anybody in this chart. Now, it's right, because the last thing the moon is going to do is what? Oh, it's going to trine the Mars. That's the last thing it's going to do. It's going to square the Saturn, and it's going to trine the Mars. But let's see. Let's look at our thing here. The sun's at 18 degrees of Aries. The moon's at 5 degrees of Virgo. Meaning that the moon is it's a previous new moon in this chart. So that's 1 day, 3, 5, 7, 9, 12. So 12 minus 19 is 7. So 7 degrees of Aries. That would be the first thing. That would be the last, that's where we would start, kind of 7 degrees of Aries. So at 7 degrees of Aries, what would be the next thing? The first thing it's going to do is it's going to sextile the Saturn. So nothing necessarily that shows us about Mars, except for the fact that Mercury is in Aries. So in this particular case, we've got an angular Mars, which we could use. We've also got Mars as ruler of the natural fourth, Mars as ruler of the 10th, and is in the fourth. And then Mars is, who's the part of fortune? Mercury. And Mercury, the ruler of the part of fortune, is in a Mars-related sign. And we've got the ruler of the 6th on the part of fortune. Now, let's see, did we have any other planets on the part of fortune prior? Look at how with Alzheimer, we've got the moon on the part of fortune. That's interesting to me. So moon on the part of fortune, moon Saturn on the part of fortune. And of course, moon is mind and Saturn is the ponderousness and the heaviness or the fog, or the brain fog or whatever in this particular case. Mangali, let's see. Oh, see, I was wondering if this was maybe, it's a AA chart, but I was wondering if this was maybe 10 minutes ahead so that we could put the part of fortune in Aquarius with the Mars on it. But in this particular case, yes, so Michelangelo, he's no more for art specifically, but is interesting with the other chart. We're going to get to that one, come back to that one in a second. But this chart is known. Are we going to compare the previous new moon degree to the natal placement degrees, right? And not the syzygic chart degrees? I don't understand what you're asking, Layla. Go ahead and just ask it.
Okay, so I was asking that since we're moving, since we're checking to see whether it was the previous new moon or if the previous full moon, right? So
Yes.
let's say in this example, we figured out that this would be around early degrees of Virgo, right?
Yes.
So now to see what the next,
late
yeah.
degrees.
Yeah, so to see what next aspect it makes, we're gonna look at the degrees in the natal chart and not the chart that when the full moon happened, right? Because that would be a different chart.
Yes,
when
yes. We're just using it from the degree of the previous new moon.
Yeah, we're just gonna take the degree of the previous new moon,
Yeah,
and compare it with the natal degrees.
Right, we're not going to take it from that chart. So
Right.
that's the question. So yeah, we're not going to move all the placements back to that chart, or that's how I understand it. Is that we basically do it as though we were projecting it from the ascendant. So we're basically we're making the previous new or full moon an ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
And we're projecting. And we're like projecting a daily progression from the moon from the ascendant to whatever the next, we're just rolling it forward to whatever the next planet might be. Everything else stays the same.
Okay, it's just the degree of the moon.
Just the degree of the moon. Exactly.
All right.
Same thing with the part of fortune. We don't change it back to when the part of fortune was at. So in this case, let's say this were a night chart and we were going to do it with the part of fortune. We don't change it back. We don't change the chart to when the part of fortune was at 0 degrees Capricorn. Get it? Same thing. We don't change the chart to when it was a full moon. We don't change the chart. We just use virtual degrees.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Good question. Excellent question. But notice also, it's looking like, to be honest, the part of fortune is the ruler of the part of fortune is really showing more, quite a bit more. In this case, we don't have a connection between the part of fortune and the 6th house ruler, but we do have the Mars squaring the ruler of the part of fortune, and we saw that again. Now here with Louis Ozu, we've got the ruler of the 6th on the part of fortune. We've got the Saturn in the 5th, so to speak. We've got the Mercury ruled by Mars. We've got the Mars ruling the 10th house, and we've got the Mars ruling the 10th and in the 4th. right? And of course, once again, if we didn't have that, then we would have the Mars ruling the fourth, and we would have all of these planets in Aries there. So once again, there's a strong Martian aspect to the chart. So we're seeing with almost anybody who's using something to cut the body and run, and that makes the blood run, makes the blood, you know, that sheds blood, that we're looking almost always, that Mars is always involved somehow. There's some kind of involvement. So here is Laurent Alexandre. Laurent Alexandre, what's the scoop on him? Laurent Alexandre was a urologist surgeon born to dentists. And he's an author, but he was a urologist. So tell me, what either sign or house would we be looking for to represent the area of urology? Anyone?
Is it the same as genitals?
Yeah.
Scorpio, the zodiac.
Scorpio, and then what house?
8th.
8th house. So who's
Yeah.
the ruler of the 8th house here?
Saturn.
And Saturn is where?
In the 6th.
In the 7th. He's on the cusp of the 7th.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he's on the part of fortune, more importantly.
Oh,
So we can see the connection with the urology, with the issue. Now look also how it's you know, not a it's not a really good one, but look also how there's a connection between the Mars and the Saturn. Now there's already a connection between Mars and Saturn because Capricorn is the part of fortune, and Capricorn is what? It's ruled by Saturn and its exaltation ruler. Oh, why would we look at the 8th? Because the planets, I mean, rather, the zodiac signs and the houses rule the same parts of the body. And urology would be dealing with the penis, the urethra, the bladder, etc. And all of that is ruled by the sign Scorpio or the 8th house. So that's why we would be using urology for that. We could also use 7th house if it gets to the kidneys, right? And then sure enough, their Saturn is in the 7th, and there also is the part of fortune, right? And there's also this connection with Mars, even though it is a separating conjunction or separating square. Notice also that the moon's last separating aspect was to whom?
Separating aspect was to the sun. Oh no, Mercury. But yeah, it could be, no, it could be sun because it was in opposition.
Nope. Nope. The moon's at 29 Sagittarius. Mercury's at 11 Cancer. Right, there can't be Mercury. She hasn't gotten there yet. Who is the
No,
last?
I'm saying it's sun. Sun, because it was opposing sun.
No, it's Mars, sweetie.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's my point.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what-
it was a trine. Yeah.
So here's the, once again, there's my point. We've got, so what we're seeing is, what we're seeing with these surgeons is almost always there's a connection between the ruler of the part of fortune and Mars, and that the
Yeah.
moon is either applying or separating from Mars. Now let's look and see what we're, now we can deal with what you were just talking about. So is this a previous new moon or full moon chart?
Previous full moon.
Very
Oh,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Which means we don't really have to go back even a full day. So we'll take this to the 19th
Yeah.
degree, right? So we'll take this to the 19th degree of Libra, I mean, Gemini. What is the next application from 19th degree of Gemini?
19.
20, 21, 22.
Wait, it's a full moon, so it would be 19 degrees of Sagittarius, right?
No,
Would
no,
it
no.
be a sextile to Mars?
Oh, you're right. It's from,
Yeah.
right. Thank you very much. You're right. So we were doing it from 22 degrees or 19 degrees of Sagittarius. Well, what's the next application? What's the next application?
It would be Aries,
Mars.
Mars. Yeah.
Okay, so so you see what I'm saying? In almost every single chart, this has worked. Finding in almost every single chart where we've looked at these surgeons, it's been where either it's obvious and the moon's applying, or it's obvious and the moon is just separated, and it's doubly obvious because the moon, if we take the moon from the degree of the previous new moon or full moon, the next application is actually Mars.
Hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
far, right? So far, that's what we've seen. And Mars is in the natural 10th house, right? The whole sign 10th. Although we would probably use the Saturn, right? We'd use the Saturn as, and notice the Saturn is connected with Mars, but the Saturn is where the urology comes from, right? The Saturn is the ruler of the 7th and the 8th. So it's the kidneys, the urethra, the bladder, all of that stuff, 7th and 8th house. So it is the profession, right? But Mars is connected, and both with the moon and with the ruler of the part of fortune and with the planet that we've decided is the ruler of the significator for profession. This is a really good example. And look, it's on the part of fortune as well. This one is a stellar example. And I've never heard of any of these people. Now, this guy is famous, or he was in something called Botched. So this is a famous TV doctor. So he's a plastic surgeon, and then from plastic surgery, he got into television. And notice how there's a Mercury-Venus conjunction in this chart. So that's the performing arts, right? So that's the singer actor. So this is the TV doctor. So first of all, though, notice that Mars is ruler of the 6th. What's the moon's last application in this chart?
The sun?
Nope.
No? Okay.
It's Mars.
Oh, wait, Mars. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now
Yeah, Mars.
let's find the previous new moon. So it's a new moon chart. It's probably a little bit more than a day, right?
Yeah.
So 1320, right? Not quite 1320. So a day. We can take this back one. So we put it in the 20th degree. What's the next application after 20 degrees of Virgo?
It's again Mars.
See? Didn't we see that? What's the last? We've
Wait,
seen
it
that.
would be Saturn too, right?
Saturn's at no, because where do we go back to? We went back to 20 degrees.
20 Virgo. So wouldn't it square the Saturn at 19 Sagittarius?
No, I think it's okay. Maybe it could, but I don't think so. I think it's obviously
It
Mars.
would be separating. It would be separating.
I mean, we'd have to find the exact degree in minutes.
Yeah.
It's close. It's close either
Yeah.
way. It's Saturn or Mars, but I think it's Mars. But either
Yeah.
way, so even if it doesn't work that way, it works by looking at the last aspect that the moon made was to Mars.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then we've got that Jupiter in Scorpio again. We've got another person with Jupiter Scorpio. We've seen that in a few different charts, and they've been in different periods. Hold on a second. Where was that other one we saw? This guy's Mengele born in
Mengele.
1911.
Yeah.
Alzheimer born in 1864. Isn't that interesting?
1864.
1864, 1911, 1958. This Jupiter and Scorpio thing, and look, Mars ruling the 6th.
Mm,
Were they both in the 5th too?
I think so.
yeah.
Also, Gemini rising again, Mars ruling the 6th. Hold on. Was it Laurent Alexandre? No, what's it? Terry Dubrow, Gemini rising, Mars ruling the 6th. And who was the other one we saw? Oh, Mengele. Cancer rising. But once again, Jupiter, Scorpio in the 5th.
Yeah.
But this would be,
Wait,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Why
the fifth.
Scorpio? Because of the surgery part? Because Jupiter and Scorpio is not like a bad planetary placement.
No, but no, certainly, I'm not saying anything bad about that at all. I'm saying how interesting that we're seeing Jupiter and Scorpio in these surgeons,
Yeah.
in these different surgeons' charts from completely different eras.
I'm sorry, I phrased it as qualitative. I meant that it's not in like detriment or fall. It doesn't have essential
Oh,
dignity, but it's
it's,
peregrine.
it's
What
peregrine.
gives?
But remember, peregrine is considered a debility because the planet has no dignity. It's completely and maybe here it even shows it. The planet is completely under the control of the planet who rules the sign it's in. So in this particular case, Jupiter is under Mars's influence, which makes perfect sense, right? And Jupiter is the main benefic. And so he's going to give benefit through increase and compassion and helpfulness, etc. And more than likely, I bet this person has a very kind of beneficial. Notice that Jupiter is the ruler of the 10th as well in this chart, and he's in Scorpio. So once again, we've got this connection between Mars and the ruler of the 10th. Who's the ruler of the part of fortune? Mercury is the ruler of the part of fortune. And note that Mercury is with Venus and Mars is in the sign of Venus. And so this was a little bit less. This one, oh wait, but look, the sun is applying to Mars. So let's move this back. Oh, and we already saw that with the moon. The last aspect she made was to Mars, and that Mars is also, if we take it back, is more than likely, we'll say more than likely, the next application to the moon from the degree of the new moon. But this Jupiter, especially this Jupiter Neptune, because didn't the other one have Jupiter Neptune as well? No, but Jupiter Rahu or Jupiter Ketu, did Mengele have Jupiter Ketu? So Jupiter Rahu for Alzheimer, Jupiter Ketu for Mengele. Interesting. And then Jupiter Neptune for Terry Dubrow. This is Paul Langeron. And Paul Langeron,
Okay, also when we check about the previous new and full moon, if the next aspect is to Rahu or Ketu, do we take that into consideration or do we just see the planets?
Planets only.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, planets only.
No angles, no Rahu Ketu.
So this person is a visceral specialist, a doctor who's a visceral specialist. So what house or sign would we be looking for that? Yeah, French visceral and vascular surgeon.
Who rules the heart?
Well, vascular is not just the heart, right? But it's also
Leo rules the heart, right?
Leo rules the heart, but he's not a heart surgeon.
Oh, so he's like a movement of blood surgeon? I'm sorry, I don't know shit about health.
So the vascular, let's look at that for a second. That's a good question. Vascular system. But
circulatory system vascular.
When I think vascular, I think the veins. The vascular tissue is a complex conducting tissue formed of more than one cell type found in vascular planets. Vascular plants. Primary components of vascular tissue are the xylem and phloem, but that's in a plant. Overview of the vascular. The circulatory system.
Yeah.
Vascular, so it's the veins. The vascular system is the circulatory system. Also called, so it's made up of vessels, so it's the blood vessels and the stuff that carries the lymph. The arteries and the veins carry blood. So arteries and veins. So who rules that stuff?
Libra?
Okay. So it's a planet that rules the veins and the arteries, and that would be Mercury.
Okay, if it's a planet, right? Okay.
But if we're talking about the viscera, What area are we talking about? What zodiac sign or what house are we talking about?
I don't know. I thought it was Libra. I'm Googling it now. It looks like someone else says it's Aquarius. That makes less sense.
No, Virgo, because the viscera is our guts. So it's the digestive system.
Oh, I was
It would be-
thinking about
It's the sixth house, and it would be the sixth house and Virgo, sixth house or Virgo. So note here that Mars is the ruler of the sixth house.
Yeah.
And then who's the ruler of the part of fortune in this chart? It's the sun. Okay, so the ruler of the part of fortune is in Taurus. Someone's just saying something. I have a friend that's urology surgery, Gemini rising, sun in Taurus, Leo, he's born in 36, Mars. We need to be seeing all the other stuff though as well, Ava. And welcome, I think you might be new, so great to have you here. We need to be looking at all the other stuff that we've been looking at too. So notice that Gemini, so see, even look with the vascular system with Mercury and Gemini. So Venus and Mercury and Gemini here, and note that the sun is in the Venus Mercury conjunction, in the sign of the Venus Mercury conjunction. Then secondly, is there a connection between the ruler of the part of fortune and Mars? There is not. Now this is one of the few charts that does not have a connection between it. Is there a connection between the moon and Mars? What's the next aspect that's happening? The next major aspects that are happening are to Mercury, then to Venus, and then the very last aspect that the moon will make is to Mars. Mars will collect. That's what we kind of call collecting. So this is one of those charts where it doesn't really show quite so much, except maybe where this Venus Mars. See, the next thing that Venus is doing is she's applying to Mars, which means that this Venus-Mercury-Mars opposition is ruling this Taurus, is ruling this sun in Taurus. And so that's the main thing that points to me, is that there's still a connection between that. And then ultimately, the moon's last aspect will be to Mars. Now let's look to see so this is a previous full moon. So the previous full moon should have been somewhere in Scorpio. So this will give us 1 day, 3, 5, 7. So back 7 brings us to 19 degrees of Scorpio. 19 degrees of Scorpio. So what would be the next thing that she would have done? Nothing, right? Oh, 19 degrees of Scorpio, nothing, right? She'd have to leave the sign, and the next thing she would do is she would apply to Saturn by sextile. Note that Saturn's in the Venus sign. So Venus, once again, Venus's next application is to Mars. So that puts the whole, and notice that Venus's next application is to the ruler of the sixth. We've already talked about seeing the ruler of the sixth involved in this, but then we've also talked about the ruler of the sixth representing the viscera and the guts and the digestive system of the person. And then the fact that Venus is also with Mercury, who would represent the vascular system. So I think that this is interesting. So in this particular case, it's the fact that Venus and Mars are so connected that we get to see that all of the other planets that are in Venus signs become colored once again by Mars. So even though this particular chart didn't show some of the things that we were looking for as far as seeing Mars connected to surgery, we still kind of have it. We still have his influence fully. This is Story Musgrave. Now, Story Musgrave was an astronaut. Now he starts he's got many different degrees. He was a mathematician, so Mercury should be important, and sure enough, there's Mercury in the first house, exalted. He was a mathematician. He did study. He did do like an internship as a surgeon, but then kind of immediately went to NASA. So this person was a doctor, but not. And now look once again, Jupiter Scorpio. This person born in 1935. Now I didn't do this on purpose. You know, I just kind of been looking at charts, and note that the ruler of the part of fortune is with Mars. Now we're back on the territory that we're used to. And note that the moon's next application is, well, the moon's next application is to Mercury, but Mercury's next application is to Mars. So once again, we've got Mars connected. Now, if we didn't know that we were looking at doctors, right? If we were just kind of saying, okay, look at this chart, and what do you think this person would be? Like, we see that all the time on Reddit. What do you think would be a good career thing for me? So what are some things? Okay, I want your input now. What are some things that you would now, based on what we've just been doing, what are some things that you would be looking for if you saw a Reddit post that said, what do you think is a career I should be looking into?
Okay, first we're gonna look at the first house.
I don't know. How foolproof has that shown itself to be? Not particularly. What's shown itself to be really almost practically foolproof in almost every chart? A planet who's with
the ruler of the part of fortune making an aspect.
That's right.
Maybe.
Almost every. Yes, that's exactly what I was. Exactly. The ruler of the part of fortune making an aspect to some planet, and then the moon as well, to the same planet. That's what we're seeing. So the moon is the moon separating from the same planet that's aspecting the ruler of the part of fortune. That's been the thing that we've seen on and on. Here we're seeing it again. Note also that the ruler of that Mars is the ruler of the fourth. So also is the planet the ruler of an angle? It looks like that part is kind of important too.
Yeah.
But here I mean, and this Jupiter in Scorpio, are we thinking that maybe this might be something of a signature for a notable surgeon?
Yeah, definitely. We saw it in too many charts.
And in
Also Jupiter with the nodes, right? We also saw that a lot of times.
That's right, Jupiter with the nodes we saw Jupiter with Neptune, but really Jupiter in Scorpio was the main thing that we've seen in almost every chart. And I didn't choose it on purpose, I promise you. It's really funny how I choose charts. Like, I just choose them mostly based on the right rating, but I find that a lot of the charts that I choose end up having strange, like, remember last time when we did Billie Holiday and Leontine Price, and they both were Aquarius rising charts with a bunch of stuff in Pisces. And, you know, and so, okay, so now, here's George Eugene Moore. George Eugene Moore is the person who realized that there was a connection between chewing tobacco and oral cancer. What planet rules the mouth?
Venus, I guess.
No, the sun rules the mouth. The sun rules the mouth. Note that the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the part of fortune is the moon, and he's with the sun. Also, the house that rules the mouth is what? The house that rules food and intake, what would that be?
The fourth house rules the stomach, so
But which house? But which house rules the mouth that eats the food? Second house. Very good, Ava. Right. So the second house. Who's the ruler of the natural second house in this chart? Of the whole sign second?
Leo.
The sun is the ruler of the whole sign second. So we've got this connection with the mouth, with the ruler of the part of fortune. Is there a connection between the ruler of the part of fortune and Mars?
It's just separated from Mars.
What did you say?
It's just separated from Mars. They
Just
formed a
separated.
trine.
What, and what is the last aspect that the moon is made?
The last aspect.
Yeah, that the moon is made. It's a trick question. The last aspect the moon is made is to Mars.
Yeah.
Once again, and notice also Mars is ruler of the sixth.
Yep.
We don't have any Jupiter in Mars this time. I mean, in Scorpio
Wait,
this
how
time.
is Mars aspecting the moon in this chart?
It's a separating trine.
Is it 1, 2? Oh, I guess you're right.
Come on, really? Pisces to Scorpio? Pisces to Scorpio, sweetie? As a matter of fact, it makes a grand trine with the part of fortune. No, don't ever. Or with the north node and the part of fortune and the moon Mercury. No, we don't do that. But yes, so we see even here, bam, Mars is involved. Now, any planets in this particular chart, the Mars is the ruler of the natural 10th of the whole sign 10th, but the moon, the ruler of the part of fortune, is in the midheaven, right? And the moon, and once again, the moon is in, so moon's in the 10th. Notice that the ruler of the 10th is in Leo. Leo is ruled by the sun, which is the mouth. Right? So either way, we've got it. And also notice that the sun is applying to Mars. So the sun's applying to Mars. And remember, the sun and Mars are the rulers of the natural rulers of Aries, which is the natural whole sign house, the natural whole sign 10th. So we've got all this stuff with Dr. George Eugene Moore, right? A little bit, not as, I mean, it was more subtle in the last chart with all the stuff in the Venus signs. This one is much more, so let's just, in case we have to, we don't really have to, right? We're going to take this back to probably the very beginning, either the very beginning or the very end, either the very beginning of Pisces. Okay, Ava, thanks so much for joining us, and you're welcome anytime. So we've got this moon. If we were to move it back to the degree of the, to the actual degree of the new moon, it's either the very beginning of Pisces or the very ending of Aquarius. Either way, what's the next application? Mars. So same thing in this chart. So I think we would do a few things if we were looking for any profession. We would look to see what planets are involved with the ruler of the part of fortune. Now, Mars is Mars the ruler of the 10th? He's the natural ruler of the 10th. We would see if the planet involved with the part of fortune was also ruling the 10th house or ruling angles. We would look to see the planet that the moon was either applying to or separating from. And then we would look to see the planet that the moon would be applying to coming from the degree of the previous new moon or the previous full moon. I think those four things, way more so than what planets in the angle or anything like that, I don't think that's really shown itself to be as effective. And note, that's not really what Ali Al-Khayyat really said. Right, he said, okay, if you see that this way, then maybe use it. Same thing when we saw with Schoner. He said, hey, you know, if you see it this way, maybe use it. Paul Tessier. I think Paul Tessier is the father of craniofacial. Yeah, he's the father of craniofacial surgery. So constructive surgery for the jaw and skull. He developed following methods using autogenous bone grafts instead of silicone and acrylic. We're going to see who those planets signify, both their natural significations and natal house significations. Yes, right. Because of course we're just looking at one, right? We're just looking at one profession right now, right? We're not looking at a bunch of different things for possible profession, which we could also do. So next month when we do it, we could say, we could do a guess my profession chart. And that might be an interesting thing to do. And you could, now here's an interesting thing we could do next month, is you could find a blind chart. You could find a chart and put it forward, of, someone that we all know, and we know what they do for a living. And it could be, what do we think that they do for a living, right? Based on what we've actually been doing. So that's a possibility, right? So kind of doing a little blind chart thing. All right, so Paul Tessier, the head is the major thing. Now, in this particular case, all right, fantastic. In this particular case, what I find interesting is note that there's no connection between the Mars and the ruler of the part of fortune. The ruler of the part of fortune is Saturn, although Mars is connected to the part of fortune based on what? Based on him being exaltation ruler. But look, the moon's last application is to the part of fortune, is to Mars rather, sorry. Well, her last, no, her last application is actually to the Venus, but before that it was also to Mars. And so this person spent a lot of his time beautifying people's faces. So, reconstructing people's faces, making people look presentable, so to speak. And so this whole presentability aspect of Leo, and the fact that even though the sun is not, so this is one of those charts, Layla, where I was talking about, where we've got planets in the sign of the ascendant, but they're not close. They're in what we would call the 12th house. And note here how we've got the sun and the moon, sun and Saturn together in Leo, and Saturn's the ruler of the ascendant. The sun is the ruler of the first house, which represents the head. So that can definitely show us the kind of preoccupation. The person would have a preoccupation with presentability and the head. Now, is there anything with Uranus? Remember, we saw the Uranus with Alzheimer's. Yes, indeed. Look, the Uranus is opposing the ascendant, right? So this is a person who invented a new way of a new treatment. So indeed, we've got a Uranus that involved, and the Uranus is not only angular, but it is affecting the ascendant. So I think whenever we're dealing with people who are innovators, when we're dealing with people who discover something new, then we're looking for Uranus to show up, and sure enough, he has. Now, if we were doing the Bonatti thing, we would probably use Mercury, right? So he would be the main thing, right? He would be the main planet that we would use, but he's not really connected to the Mars. He is once again connected to the Sun-Saturn conjunction, right? But aside from that, he's not really connected to Mars. What does kind of show the connection is the moon's the moon's separation from Mars, even though it's also from Venus. So let's see. This is a diurnal chart, and it is also a previous conjunction chart, or a previous new moon. So this will take us 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. So this is going to take us into Cancer. So back 11, 9. So that would take us what, to 30 degrees of Cancer, maybe 9, 10, maybe 29, 28 degrees of Cancer. 28 degrees of Cancer. Back into Cancer. Isn't that interesting? So what's the first thing that would be done after it leaves 28 Cancer? It would go to this conjunction to the Saturn. So this one, it didn't necessarily fit for looking at the moon's particular place from the previous conjunction or the full moon. It does show the Mars from the last separation, or from a separation, even though it's not from the Venus. But notice that the Venus is just leaving from the Mars. So the moon would have gone to the Mars first, would have then brought the Mars to the Venus, and then is moving on. So this chart is not quite so specific to it. The Venus, next thing she's doing is going to the Jupiter, and really it's all kind of Sun and then Moon Mars opposition, Moon Venus trine, leaving that. So this one not as I might not have guessed it, but seeing the opposition from the ending opposition from the Mars, and also look, the part of fortune is in the 6th. So I think, knowing that the part of fortune, or that the 6th house is the house of infirmities, this is now a way to be kind of looking at the 6th house apart from, is the person going to be sick? Right. So in almost so many of these 6 situations, we've seen the 6th house has been somewhat emphasized, right? And so this kind of, it's the 6th house is more of a milieu or an arena of activity, as opposed to what actually happens to the person. That was George Eugene Moore. I think I've got, oh, that's Holstein Mengele. Okay, so these are nurses. And one of the things that we're consistently hearing with nurses is that, oh, it should be the moon, should be connected, should be a major thing in these charts, right? So the moon should be a main thing. But I think we're going to see that it's turning out to be somewhat similar. First of all, note that the planet on the ascendant is the moon. Is Mars, right? So this woman was a surgeon. She worked in an institution. I think she might have even worked with the mentally insane, the mental illness. Evna Edmondson, American trained nurse, managed a sanitarium at one time. And she was a student of astrology, active in the Red Cross and social service work. So worked as a nurse, primarily worked as a nurse. But look at that Mars right there. What's the moon's next application in this chart? To the Saturn, the opposition to the Saturn, the ruler of the note that the ruler of the part of fortune is Jupiter. So Jupiter is not with the Mars, right? Jupiter is not with Mars, and the moon is not with Jupiter either, right? There's no connection between the moon and Jupiter. But this is a nurse. Maybe we would be seeing, notice how the Venus is trining the part of fortune, and the Venus is the ruler of the 10th here. I didn't really do any studying of these charts for this. I see the Mars in the ascendant. I see the Venus is ruler of part of fortune trining the ascendant, and that Jupiter is ruling the ascendant from Cancer. That's lunar, right? All that stuff is lunar. So the ruler of the part of fortune is in Cancer, and the moon is exalted in Taurus, which is on the midheaven. The moon's next application is to the Saturn in Gemini. Mercury is also in Gemini. And look at how the moon rules the 12th house of institutions, jails and institutions and things of that nature. So maybe we're looking at, maybe we need to, for a person like a nurse, we didn't even look at the 12th house for these surgeons, right? Most surgeons work in hospitals. We didn't even look at the 12th house. Let's finish, I've only got 3 nurses. Let's finish with the nurses. And then let's finish with the nurses. And then let's go back to the doctors and look for the 12th house. Notice that the moon is applying to the ruler of the 6th house. Just something to think about. Okay, moon is applying to the ruler of the 6th. Venus, and maybe we should be thinking about, so definitely it looks like maybe moon, Venus, Jupiter might be involved with nurses. Let's move on. Maria Epstein. Grinberg is a pianist. Okay. There's the moon in the look at, there's the moon in the 10th house.
Jupiter in the 12th again.
Jupiter in the 12th. Note that the part of fortune is ruled by Mars, and so is the ascendant.
And the ruler of the 6 is
Mars.
applying to the moon. Yeah.
Mars is applying to the Mars. Mars is applying, moon is applying to Mars. Moon is applying to the ruler of the 6th again. Moon is also applying to Jupiter in the 12th. Where's the ruler of the 12th? So Venus in the 12th with Mercury, but ruler of the ascendant, moon in the ascendant, moon with the ruler of the midheaven, moon in the midheaven with the ruler of the midheaven. what happens? We go backwards. So it looks like we still need a connection with Mars for nursing. But then it looks like the moon now, it looks like a place where the moon starts to be governor or governess, so to speak. So if we were to take this back, so maybe back to 8 degrees of Leo, what would be the next application? Still would be Mars. Still would be Mars. Okay, so it looks like we still need in 6th house, 12th house, not necessarily as much of a connection, although we've got, by sign, we've got the trine between Venus and the part of fortune. And who's ruler of the 12th? The Jupiter, and the Jupiter applying to the, was there an application between Moon and Jupiter too? No, not in that one. Oh, but there was a connection between Moon and Jupiter. There was so in this chart, we have the application between Moon and Jupiter. In the last one, there was a connection, Moon in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Cancer, right? So we wouldn't call that a mutual reception. We call that in each other's generosity, but they're exchanging signs. Okay, so there's Maria Epstein. And she was a big, both of these ladies were big time nurses. Now, when I see pictures of Maria Epstein, she's the Polish one, if I'm not mistaken. And I think she almost always looks like a nun. So she might have been born Jewish, but then became a nun, but then became became Catholic. Or a lot of times there were, Jewish orphans who were raised in Catholic, because Poland is so Catholic. So they were born in these places and then converted. Yeah, she worked with dysentery, typhus, typhoid fever. She led both training groups of nurses led by organized facility. She received a Rockefeller Foundation aid and the university and she created and from Rockefeller University to create university schools and for nurses and hygienists. So she's a pretty important nurse, but like a nurse educator. Is there a 9th house aspect? Look at, there's the Mercury and the Venus. Oh, look, the moon's the ruler of the 9th. Right, so we got moon, ruler of the 9th and the 10th. And so it looks indeed like we can look at moon for nursing so far. This is Elaine Donahue. This is a fascinating chart because this woman was murdered by her husband. Notice the Mars, the retrograde Mars on the descendant there. But also notice that the Mars is applying to the ascendant, or the Mars is opposing the ascendant. So we've got the Mars connection. Okay, what's going on with the moon? Well, look at how Jupiter's ruler of the ascendant and in Cancer. I mean, ruler of the midheaven and in Cancer, and so's Mercury, who's ruler of the ascendant, in Cancer. And note, once again, we've got a Jupiter-Moon connection. And note also, we've got a Moon-Mars connection. Now, what's the previous? Let's see, previous is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So 8 degrees of Cancer. And Jupiter with the node. 8 degrees of Cancer. The Mercury is the part of the ruler of the ascendant is the first. The ruler of the ascendant is the first thing that the Mercury would come to. So first of all, it takes us into Cancer. And then all of this stuff that's in Cancer, Mercury with the ruler. So the ruler of the first is with the ruler of the 10th in Cancer. The ruler of the 10th and ruler and the moon are exchanging signs. And this woman was murdered by her husband. Okay, so, let's look and see if 12th house is involved. So Mars and Venus with the 12th. Mars is ruler of the sixth. So moon applying to the ruler of the sixth. So I think if there's a few things we've seen with nursing and medicine and doctors today is there needs to be some kind of connection with the sixth. There needs to be some kind of connection with Mars. It looks like there needs to be some kind of Venus-Jupiter connection for nurses. And often with some kind of connection with either of them ruling the 10th house, maybe, or the part of fortune. In this case, the ruler of the part of fortune is the Scorpio Saturn, but the Jupiter rules the 10th. Now we've only got 3 of these charts. In this other one, we've got the moon in the 10th, applying to the Jupiter, applying to the Mars and the Jupiter. The Mars is the ruler of the 6th. In this other chart, we've got the moon and Jupiter are exchanging. Moon's exalted in the 10th house sign. Oh, Jupiter's ruling the part of fortune, and moon is the ruler of the part of fortune of Jupiter's sign Cancer. So it looks like, yeah, we're looking for moon Jupiter stuff for nurses, and we're looking for Mars. And is there any connection between Mars and moon? Oh, there wasn't, but Mars was on the ascendant, so we didn't really need it. And and moon is applying to the 6th, is applying to the ruler of the 6th. And Maria Epstein's moon is applying to the ruler of the 6th. And Elaine Donahue, moon is applying to the ruler of the 6th. Okay, let's look at these doctors for 12th house. Now, not all of them worked in hospitals, right? So, but no, Alzheimer's probably did. And look at how we've got the Venus with the sun here. We're just kind of close to the sun. And the moon applying to the Venus, so the 12th house. So the moon applying to the 12th house. And also the moon is the exaltation ruler of Taurus. So she also rules it. Now, Mengele didn't necessarily work in hospitals, but definitely prison institutions. He worked in those camps. We don't necessarily have a connection between that. What about between the part of fortune and that? Not necessarily. Okay, so not necessarily a big connection between 12th house, certainly between captivity, which could also be seen by the 6th, but in 12th, which might be his own captivity, but someone else's captivity might be the 6th house, people that he kept as slaves. So that, and notice that stuff's in the same house ruler. Jupiter rules the 6th and the 10th here. What about Azu? So Saturn is the ruler of the 12th. Didn't look like it. Nothing specific. Sun applying to the Saturn, but nothing really else. Okay. Although you've got the issue with the Mars being exaltation ruler. Laurent Alexandre. Mercury. Where is he? Oh, there he is. Huh. So maybe so. Maybe this person worked in hospitals quite a bit. Connected to the part of fortune, connected to the ruler of the part of fortune. And look, there was 12th from the part of fortune, you've got the moon and Jupiter. So there could be a connection there. Terry Dubrow, now there shouldn't be very strong connection. Well, usually this is a plastic surgeon, so they won't be in hospitals, so they usually have their own office. So it's interesting that we've got the Mars and the 12th, but where's the Venus? Here, and not connected to the moon, connected to the ruler of the ascendant. That's it. So does the work in private could possibly be the connection with that, but maybe he was connected to a hospital at some point. But that's interesting that this points more to hospital than the others, but rule the 1st and the rule of the 12th together. Of course, Venus also rules the 5th, and of course the 5th house is entertainment, so that makes more sense. Longeron. Mars to, how about Mars to it? Venus, no. Oh yeah, Venus and Mars. Okay, yes, exactly. So this one may have also worked in, this is the craniofacial. So this one probably worked in hospitals quite a bit. I bet that is a strong connection between that. And Story Musgrave, now there shouldn't be, although Moon rules the 12th. So he probably spent some time there, right? Because he's so close to the 10th. Moon applying to the 6th house. Yes, Moon applying to the rule of the 6th. Mars, Moon will apply to Mars. His next application is actually to the Saturn, but Moon is applying to the Mars. So interesting. And then Eugene Moore, George Eugene Moore, Venus, 27 Capricorn. Not really with the Mars, not really with the part of fortune. That's interesting. Now I know he also had his own institutes, and he spent a lot of time. Oh wait, Mercury is the natural ruler of the 12th, and look at our next application. What about ruler of the 6th? And Moon's separating from the ruler of the 6th. Okay. So I think we can pretty much say that we want to see in medical charts a connection with either the Moon and the ruler of the 6th, the ruler of the part of fortune and the ruler of the 6th, but it was really Moon. And especially in the nurses' charts, right? In almost every nurse chart, I mean, we only saw 3, but in all 3 of those nurses' charts, the Moon was applying to the ruler of the 6th. Then we also saw in the nurses' charts connection between Jupiter and the Moon. And notice that both Jupiter and the Moon are the planets that make up the sign that have major dignity in the sign Cancer. And then also in the other things with anything with medicine, it looks like we want a prominent Mars, or we want Mars to have prominent influence over the chart, or that the prominence of influence of Mars over the chart can necessarily or possibly incline them towards medicine. And also that we should definitely look at not just the planet that the Moon is applying to, but the last planet that the Moon separated from as a possibility for a chart, for a planet. Now, of course, if one planet does many of those things, right? We're also seeing that one of the planet was the ruler of one of the angles, especially the 10th, that worked. We're seeing that, right? So we're seeing that when the planet was aspecting the ruler of the part of fortune, that and was ruler of the 10th, especially that worked. What we did not see was that whether or not a planet was in the 1st, the 7th, the 10th, the blah, 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 a planet was in the angles mattered. What really seemed to be necessary was whether or not the Moon was involved with it, whether or not the ruler of the part of fortune was involved with it, whether or not that planet was also the ruler of the 10th house. So even with the part of fortune, looking at primarily I might have looked at the part of fortune itself as the job, but it's looking like the part of fortune and it's looking like the planets who are connected with the part of fortune can lead one to the job, can also lead one to the job. Okay, I'm going to stop. Are there any questions actually before I stop the recording?